Greetings, my name is Kerry and welcome back to my channel. Today I have a review for you. This is a book that I received as part of a book tour. So I've already done my Instagram post by the time you'll have seen this for the book tour, but I wanted to give it a full video review as well because I really enjoyed it. So the book is called Malto. The author is Kuda di Gutu. I believe this book is self-published. It was released on the 17th of August 2021. So I received this book from Love Book Tours in exchange for an honest review. So thank you so much to Love Book Tours and to the author for allowing me to read an ebook copy of this book. I'm going to give you a synopsis. I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the main characters, and then I'm going to give you a summary of my thoughts. The book is kind of historical fantasy, and the synopsis is: for centuries the southern tribes have faced the threat of invasion from the northern kingdoms, and it seems that war is imminent following the death of Tatende, who is the pharaoh of Kush, and this is the most powerful of the 7 tribes that make up the southern kingdoms. His widow Aminarina, I love her name by the way, Aminarina, must unite the tribes and renew the fragile alliance between them, but she's not of royal blood. She was a commoner that has been raised to this position due to the fact that she was married to the pharaoh and has a child that is too young to take over ruling the kingdom, so she's kind of like ruling as regent. So she's got to convince the other tribes that they can trust her to rule. Meanwhile, another character, Kamawa, who is the son of a northern spy who was murdered by his people for falling in love with a southern woman. He was raised in the north as a child soldier and brainwashed into fighting in the northern army, but he's now come back to the south and he's got to unlearn his prejudices and try and find his way in the southern kingdom, and again try and convince the other peoples of the southern kingdom that they can trust him despite his heritage and his background. Finally, the third character, the third thread, is Prince Mauto, the title character. He's of the Katanga tribe. He's the son of the Mambo, the ruler of the Katanga tribe. He is headstrong and impulsive and needs to learn how to rein in his impulses and learn from the strategists of the kingdom of Kush to find his place both in his father's court but also in the kingdom as a whole. So that's kind of the basis. There's this war looming and these 3 characters play really important roles in what is going to happen to the southern kingdom, and their stories weave in amongst each other. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the timeline later, but the timeline does jump around and explores each of their histories. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the characters now. Malto is the title character, but actually compared to the other 2 he doesn't get quite as much airtime. So he's this headstrong prince. He's a really intriguing character and I'm hoping that he gets more page time in the follow-up books because I really wanted to know more about him and his motivations, and his family relationships were really interesting. He's been sent for most of the book to study in the kingdom of Kush, which is the neighbouring kingdom to where his tribe is from, to learn from the strategists there to try and curb some of his impulsive attitudes and find his place and find a role for himself within the kingdom. Aminarina is kind of, I would say, actually the primary character of the novel. She's the one that, particularly the first half of the novel, gets a lot of the focus. So she is the widow of Tatenda, who was the previous pharaoh, and she is taking over from him, as I mentioned, because their daughter is too young to take the throne. She's been underestimated by everyone basically her whole life. Well, no, ever since she married the pharaoh. She is highly educated and has a lot of experience. She's travelled a lot amongst the different tribes, so she understands them really well. But she was kind of dismissed as being just the pharaoh's wife who didn't really have any influence in the kingdom, when actually she played a vital role under her husband's reign and learnt a lot of the craft of what it means to be pharaoh from him. So she's got to convince the other rulers that she has what it takes to rule, but she is stronger and more powerful than either her allies or her enemies suspect. She is a very down-to-earth character, very relatable. I really liked her as a character. I'm really glad that she got the attention that she got because she was just a great character. And then the third main character that I've mentioned was Kamawa. So he was taken from his mother as a child, brainwashed by the northern tribes to be a soldier, leading a battalion of other children that were the product of essentially northern soldiers raping southern slaves that they captured in an earlier stage of the war. The magic system of this book involves totems, so each of the southern tribes has a totem, which is an animal that is associated with their tribe, and during battle they can transform into this animal and harness its power. So the northern tribes have stolen the totem of one of the southern tribes but realise that they can't use it, you have to have the blood of the tribe. So they raise up this battalion of children of mixed heritage to try and harness the power of this totem. So Kamawa was recaptured essentially during one of the battles and is now trying to figure out how he fits into southern culture and unlearn everything he learned as a child soldier. So I want to give a couple of content warnings. This is not an exhaustive list, but I can link to the book trigger warnings page, which hopefully will have a bit more of a list, although it would probably be me creating that page. But the primary ones are war, violence associated with war, references to slavery and sexual assault as well, but none of that is on page. Just the way the creation of this battalion of child soldiers that involved some not nice things happening to some of the women. But that is not to any of the featured characters. It's kind of a plot point of the narrative rather than anything that happens on page. It's also a level of an emotional manipulation and brainwashing in Kamawa's story, and that's the one where there are more references to the slavery. It's also quite a few key characters who die during the course of the story with various effects, and so there's a bit of exploration of grief and how death impacts on people. So those are the primary content warnings. I will try and link to the book trigger warnings page for this to pick up some of the more minor ones, but those are the major ones. So the summary of my thoughts about this book. There was so much to love about it. The world building was really well done. It was a little bit info dumpy in places, but the different tribes were all really well defined, and how they fitted into the Southern Kingdom, it was really evocative. I enjoyed the magic system as well. I thought that was a really fun idea. The central characters, the three that I've mentioned particularly, were really well rounded. They were likeable, their motivations were clear and understandable, and most of the secondary characters were well written as well. Some of the kind of tertiary characters were maybe a little bit more stereotypical, particularly some of the northern characters were maybe a little bit stereotypical. One thing I will say about some of the female characters was the not like other girls trope was a little bit laboured. Like the three main female characters were all described as not being like the other women, who were kind of dismissed as being only interested in really shallow things, but these women had real depth and real intelligence. So that was a little bit annoying. But the strength of the main female characters kind of mostly did make up for that. But I just was like, when one of the characters was introduced and it was so blatantly a not like other girls trope, I found that a little bit frustrating in places. The plot was fast paced. There was a good level of tension, a good level of intrigue, and it moved along really well. The timeline, I've already mentioned, this takes place over several timelines, which were kind of interwoven. It was a little bit confusing in places because it wasn't always clear where in the timeline we were. It jumped backward and forward quite a lot, and it could be a little bit disorientating at times. In terms of the narrative, it worked well and was necessary and helped the narrative move along, but as I say, I found it a little disorientating because I wasn't ever quite sure where in the timeline I was, and then a key event that we'd already covered featured again, and I was like, oh, okay, I can kind of station myself now. So I think a really simple way of solving that would have been to put little year markers in the chapter headings, like creating a more obvious calendar system for the society so you could pin down where you were in history. Because there were things like at one point we were told there was a snippet from 200 centuries earlier. So I knew that was a long time in the past, but then the next chapter came back to not quite the present, but the recent past. But it wasn't marked, so I had assumed that this whole next section was all set in the distant past, and then something happened. I was like, oh no, but that's recent. And so then I had to go back and look and check and figure out when we'd gone from the distant past to the recent past. So having some year markers but not many was just added to the confusion. It really needed every change in time to have a year marker. And actually, to be fair, that section in the distant past where it came, I kind of understand why it was there, but it was just it confused matters, and I felt either could have been included with the prologue if it was really necessary, or as an appendix, or just needed to be clearer marked that this was an aside and not part of the main narrative, because the next section that it introduced was too similar, so it felt like it was a continuation. Anyway, that aside, the timeline, it worked, it was just confusing. There were also a few typographical errors, misused words, and a few formatting errors, which did kind of draw me out of the story a little bit, but didn't stop me from enjoying it. And what I would say is I feel like this book needed a bit of a more thorough edit that would have solved some of the issues of changing in tenses, which is something that frustrates me when that happens in books, or perspective shifts within paragraphs, or like I mentioned about the clarity over the timeline. A little bit more thorough editing would have solved, I think, the majority of the problems with this book and would have raised my rating. So if those issues hadn't been there, it would have easily been a 4-star read for me, maybe even pushing 5 stars. But with those things, they were enough to draw me out of the story or confuse me too much that I couldn't quite follow what was going on. So it did make me drop my rating down to 3 stars, which is still a good rating. It's still a book I really enjoyed. I would recommend it if you go in aware of these issues. It was a really fun book, and I definitely got caught up in the story, got caught up with the characters. I wanted to know how it turned out. I wanted to keep reading, even when I was like slightly annoyed that I didn't understand what was happening. I wanted to get to the end, and I definitely want to carry on the series and find out what happens next. And the final thing that I will say is that at the end of the book was a kind of author's note, including the inspiration for the character names and the real life tribes that the tribes in the book were based on. And I thought that was a lovely detail. It showed the depth of research and the familiarity with the history of the region of these African nations that had inspired the book. So I really loved that that was included and taught me a little bit more about African history. So I think this was great for a self-published debut novel. I think Kuda di Gutu is a name to watch in African-inspired storytelling. I would definitely want to carry on with this series. I'm really glad that I read it. I really enjoyed it. Yeah, aside from those few issues that I mentioned, it was really worth a read. If you're prepared to cope with that, then I think this book is one that I would definitely recommend. Definitely worth reading despite these few issues that I've mentioned. That is all I've got to say about that book. Let me know if you've read it, which I don't think many people have. But if you have read it, I'd love to know what you thought of it, or if you're intrigued enough that you might want to read it, let me know that too. Or if you have recommendations of books on similar themes or with similar inspirations, then let me know, because I'm always looking out for new books to read, particularly from African storytellers or from people from different cultural backgrounds to my own, to learn more about those cultures through fiction or through non-fiction anyway. So yeah, give me any recommendations down in the comments. Or if you just want to let me know that you've been here, you can leave me a lion emoji, because Mauto, the primary character, is from the Katanga tribe and their totem is a lion, and that's why there's a lion on the cover. So you can leave me a lion emoji down in the comments just to let me know you've been watching. You can also like this video if you liked it, and subscribe if you haven't already, and you can also follow me on my social media. All that information will be listed for you in the description box below. But that's it for today, so thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you again soon. Bye!